A life without canned food in the 60s? A life without fun, a boomer would say. With cheap meals and lazy cooking being the number kitchen trend in the 1960s, there were some canned foods the boomers simply could not live without. Come along as we learn the original 60s love story, boomers and their canned foods. So, canned mincemeat was something you'd get for dirt cheap. I'm talking about barely 25 to 30 cents, which puts prices today to a world of shame. But who's comparing? I am. It hurts. We used to be a proper country. Boomers really did enjoy that time, and I can't blame them. You get chopped meat complete with spices and aromatics for that price, and you start to realize why and how these people were making pies every day. Anyway, you want to take a guess at how the mincemeat craze really started? When canned food first started appearing, the whole idea here was to advertise it in a way that really sold the "you don't need to work for your food anymore" factor. They'd say things like "this'll help keep the wife out of the kitchen," and people would just eat it up, literally. Then you start having things like televisions roll around, where people largely just moved to things they could easily eat while watching and didn't take a long while to make. And you get how mincemeat became the iconic canned food it is today. But if you think that's all they had, you're sorely mistaken, my friend. Sometimes boomers would get tired of the regular routine and switch it up with Armour Star's barbecue ribs in a can. Yes, actual, well-made, pre-cooked saucy pork ribs in cans. These were meant to last and were made in a way that helped extend their shelf life. Ever wonder where the whole idea of preservatives started from? So, by the time of the 1940s and 1960s, the entire population had pretty serious battle scars from the Depression. Years of living off of crumbs and government rations will do that to you. What that did do was create an extended effect where even after peacetime began, people were still living by their frugal habits and mindsets. Everyone wanted what would save a buck, and canned food producers took note. Now, who could ever forget Campbell's soup? This is a household staple if I've ever heard of one, and it's a pretty magical thing when you think about it from the boomer's perspective. Today, we're spoiled. Let's face it, we are. We walk up to a store and get anything we want packaged, canned, or frozen, but all these goodies started somewhere, and Campbell's soup was one of the most popular and long-lasting brands to do it. It had this condensed soup that just needed water or milk added and came in accessible flavors like cream of mushroom, chicken noodle, and tomato. The range with this thing was insane. Did you know you could even use this soup as the base for a casserole or as its sauce? And all that for just 10 to 12 cents. Pretty good steal, right? Considering it wasn't just a meal, it was a lifesaver for busy moms and a comforting staple for families during tough times. The iconic red and white can became a symbol of good food, finding a place in nearly every pantry. Campbell's ads even taught clever recipes like turning cream of mushroom soup into a creamy pasta sauce or a gravy for meatloaf. Speaking of casserole, this one's a mouthful to say, but trust me, it's worth the effort. Neo-Life. Nest Dehydrated Stroganoff Casserole was this pre-made mix that just needed water added to it so you could get rid of that icky dehydration part of the whole deal. I get why they did it because canned food that can't last is like a fish that can't swim. Kind of redundant, so it's all right. Plus, this thing always gets a pass for how close it actually came to imitating the flavor of a real casserole made from scratch. You had a creamy, beefy stroganoff cassie, which you could obviously tell is processed, but for what it was worth, which was just $1 or $2, and the amount of value you got out of it, nobody was complaining about a little bit of a powdery aftertaste. Stroganoff is definitely something that was more popular in their time, though. Have you eaten much of it, or is it something you regularly get a plate of? Throughout the Depression, the war, and every little bit of chaos after, canned bread was a constant friend, ally, and supporter of the American people. This dense, sweet, and spongy bread used to get that way thanks to a neat little trick known as steaming before canning, which really helped it retain that airy, sponge-like texture. This was used in war for soldiers as a part of government rations, and even organizations like the Red Cross would have it during many of their food drives. For just 20 or 25 cents, you could get some pretty decent bread, and the entire idea of this was to market how practical and convenient it is. I gotta say, it worked because people bought it in droves. Seriously, go ask your mom and dad about how much people used to get canned bread back in the day and how it was used for rations. They pretty much paired it with things like Campbell's soup or used it as a side for other dishes that involved bread. Not everybody even had an oven back then, and in an era with an increasing focus on hustling and grinding your way into a nice little retirement, the appeal of baking bread from scratch for a few hours wasn't really something people were too into. Now this one's really going to blow your mind. Imagine a world where you can get Monarch Alaska King Crab for just 50 cents, or max $1. See, that's my kind of capitalism. These days you go out on a date, and the idea of either of you ordering the crab really sets your finances back for the remainder of the week. Back then, it was literally in abundance. I mean, you couldn't go a day without your friendly neighborhood fisherman catching a fat, juicy crab that was just begging to be boiled. Of course, that meant that canned crab was an idea that wasn't too far down the pipeline. It was made to preserve the sweetness we've come to love crab for, and it was used in all kinds of dishes. Crab casseroles, salads, as a dip, or even crab sandwiches. The options were pretty broad. I gotta say, it must have been easy to keep in shape when all the protein you could ever want is that easy to get. How about you? Think king crab something you'd fill your cabinets up with if you were born back in our parents' days? Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Feeling like your taste buds aren't being represented so far? Don't worry, we have a can for everyone, even the pickiest of eaters. This time around, we're going to talk about the miracle that is canned rice pudding. Sweet, creamy, and topped with just the perfect amount of cinnamon, vanilla, or nutmeg. This was the definition of a no-effort meal. I'm not joking around when I say all you needed to do was grab a spoon and rip that can open. As far as desserts went, it was pretty hard to compete with this 20-cent wonder and how much of a chokehold it had on the market. You could make more fancy desserts out of it, or you could just stick to the rice pudding, but for $1, you had pretty much your entire family fed. See, that's the economy we signed up for when we thought I'd grow up and get a job. I get that we can't print more money and all, but is bringing back affordable rice pudding too much to ask? Sometimes being a boomer doesn't sound so bad. What about you? Think you'd settle down in another era if you could savor all the food we don't have anymore? As goofy as this name sounds, and please bear with me because I really can't say spork and speef without chuckling, it was actually a legit idea for an afternoon lunch. Before that though, let's get into what it is. Spork is basically just canned processed pork, and beef is exactly the same. But beef? I want whoever named these to win some kind of award. I'm not even sure if there's a category for best product names out there, but if there is, this guy should win. Luckily for this, the name wasn't the only thing it had going for it. It was really a lot like Spam, and it was affordable, easy to take around with you in your bag, and even easier to prepare since it was all pre-made. We're going to go into it in detail later, but this was really similar in texture and taste to Spam, just minus the tropical elements. It was a shelf staple. If you had a can of this and 2 slices of bread, you could pretty much make a sandwich today. See all those 10-step sandwich recipes on TikTok that ask you to go get a giant loaf of bread? Out with that, in with this. Bring back convenient sandwich making. Plus, speef and spork were really good because they were so versatile. It was even a competitor to Spam because you could pretty much pair this with any classic breakfast or dish that was typical for Americans and get to eating. It was a great way to liven up some meals that were otherwise good but had gotten pretty monotonous thanks to being such regular mainstays at American tables. Speef was definitely the better option for families though, since it was a mix of beef and pork sometimes as well. You could make some banger casseroles off of this. Now take me seriously when I say this, but you could get canned or bottled chocolate milk too. I know that's not exactly new information because you can still get it, but what you might be surprised to know is that your mom and dad at 30-something were still more likely than not avid chocolate milk enjoyers. You can hold that one over their head next time they tell you to eat like an adult when you walk in with some Dr. Pepper or cereal for breakfast. This was just as good as any chocolate milk you could at home, and it cost just a few cents. The powdered alternatives were even more affordable, but they didn't have that same magic that the canned ones did. These really were deliciously sweet, and I don't know if they actually used a lot of chocolate, but most of the companies I tried that were popular in the boomer era really had a strong cocoa flavor. Mixed vegetables were pretty much what they sound like. You had the usual gang of peas, green beans, corn, carrots, corn, some celery, and corn again. Did I emphasize that they really liked their corn? I hope I did. Anyway, for just about 15 cents, all the nutrition in the world was at your fingertips, and it was a massively good way to plan your meals and save money at the same time. You could use this as a standby meal, put it in a pot pie, use it for casseroles and side dishes, or whatever else. Stir-fry them and serve it up with rice or eat it with some chili. The world is your oyster. Or your carrot? Anyway, you could do a lot here. Also, it was a really convenient way for grandmas and home chefs to sneak in some greens in their kids' foods without them realizing it. Can't walk up into the kitchen and say, "Mom, no carrots," if she pulls a fast one on you and sneaks ready-made vegetables from a can, huh? Golden syrup is this really thick sugar syrup that is pretty accurately named because, wow, this thing has a vibrantly strong amber hue. That kind of fits the taste of the syrup too. When I see amber-colored things, especially sweet ones, my mind goes straight to caramel. Does that happen for you too? We'd both be right though, since the syrup was caramel-flavored. It also had a sweetener that really sealed the whole deal together, wrapped in a neat little bow. You could use this for so many things, like making your porridge a bit more lively with this, adding it to desserts for some extra oomph, or using it as a drizzle over buttermilk pancakes. The possibilities covered breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so you can see why every boomer's home had this in their pantry. A lot of easy and no-fuss baking recipes like flapjacks and tarts were pretty much reliant on this syrup, and for good reason too. This thing really tasted amazing. Deviled ham is pretty much exactly what you're used to seeing. The finest ham you've ever seen in a can, minced to perfection and blended with just the right amount of mustard, spices, and seasonings. You can make sandwiches out of this or use it as a spread, but beyond that, it's not really something you could do too much with it. It's one of those canned foods that doesn't really have much in terms of variety, but does excel at what it does, so we'll give it a pass. You could get it for 20 cents or just a few more, but if you really wanted ham heaven in a can, then the obvious pick was Underwood. This was arguably the most dominating brand and helped every grocery store drive its sales up for the month. Not to mention, it was responsible for a lot of ham sandwiches. People swore by its versatility, often packing it into school lunches or smearing it on crackers for an easy appetizer at home parties. Deviled ham's spicy kick gave it a unique edge, making it a favorite for picnics and road trips too. Housewives appreciated how long it lasted on the shelf, giving them a quick fix for surprise guests or after-school snacks. And who could forget the iconic devil logo on the packaging? It became a recognizable staple in American households, a small but satisfying indulgence that offered the flavor of home-cooked ham without all the effort. You know how boomers love a good low-effort food. Deviled ham may not have been the star of gourmet cuisine, but it was undeniably a reliable classic. If we move on over to the kids' menu for a second, we'll find alphabet spaghetti, every boomer parent's dream food. The dish was simply canned tomato sauce pasta, but the pasta spelled out the alphabet. It's a little educational, a little tasty, and pretty cheap. Its best quality is easily that it could be paired with a number of things like toast, ham, or sausages, and you could even mix some peas and corn in there for a bit of a nutritional kick. It was a favorite for families with lots of children, and back in the day, that was pretty much every family. Hooray for Planned Parenthood, I guess. You could also serve it up plain as it is, but that was more for kids that had already acquired a finer palate, which happily included pasta. Most kids were still eating mud from the playground, really. The playful shapes and vibrant sauce weren't just meals, they were fun on a plate. Parents loved how easy it was to prepare, especially after a long day, and kids were entertained while eating. It wasn't uncommon for families to turn dinner time into a mini spelling game, laughing at the words the spaghetti created. For parents looking to stretch their budget, these cans were lifesavers. They packed enough carbs to keep growing kids full and satisfied. Plus, it made vegetables like peas and corn just a little more bearable for picky eaters. This quirky meal became a symbol of simpler times, where dinner didn't need to be fancy to be memorable. Next, we're going to look at a classic for coastal cities, which is some old-fashioned canned sardines. Usually, the cans would be filled with oil, water, sauces, mustard, or tomatoes, and they had a lot of flavor and health benefits. You could get some really vivid and salty fish that also happened to be full of omega-3, making your lank account only slightly lighter and your body 10 times fresher. Plus, the best part about fish like this was just how easy it was to make it, and all the things you could do with it. You could steam the fish, boil it, or even grill it and fry it. If that wasn't up your alley, then you could just eat it with crackers, make a sardine sandwich, or even dice it up and use it as a pizza topping or in a salad. People even used sardines in pasta, and I don't know about you, but I think that covers most of what we eat in our daily lives. All that for just 10 cents? Sign me up. Plus, sardines were arguably the most common catch of the day. That explains why they're so cheap. But it also meant that this was a taste pretty much everyone had acquired over years and years of eating them, so not only was it cheap and good, it was familiar and nostalgic. Real comfort food vibes, you know? Ravioli, where would we be without you? Or Chef Boyardee, since he's the one that really made this whole thing mainstream by giving us the most accessible and delicious canned ravioli you could find. If convenience really is the theme, then this is stealing the show. You didn't need to do a single thing to it, you didn't need to add anything. All the work that you had to do was simply heat it up and serve it with whatever you'd like. You could also just eat it on its own, which was a perfectly valid option, or pair it with some bread, salads, or sauces for a better, more legit-looking meal. Maybe not the whole 9 yards, but a little effort really goes a long way in selling the whole thing. For just 20 cents, you had an incredibly effective meal and a damn good way to enjoy some Italian food at home. One thing I've learned from scouring the history of America's cuisine and culinary changes is that there are more kinds of peas and beans than there are birds in the sky. One of those is marrow fat beans. And yes, I know that's a new word for you. When I first read it, I had no idea what it was either. They're just mature green peas that have been dried to give them a far more starchy texture, and some people kind of go pretty crazy for stuff like that. You had to rehydrate them, but they were some really good peas for what they were worth. You could pair these up with sandwiches or any kind of bean-based dish, or if you had a recipe that uses vegetables as a topping or as a side. It was definitely something meatheads and gym bros were keen on adding every day to their diets for that extra protein. It really goes to show you how much they wanted convenience. But healthy eating was the norm in the country, though. Lately, it feels like you can't go 2 minutes without a new fried chicken place. Now, who can go without some canned salmon? Funny enough, it's crabs and salmon that are actually some of the most expensive seafood you can get in the modern world. Back in the time of our boomer parents, they were such common catches thanks to the ever-so-lively fishing industries that it was impossible to spend a day without smelling some salmon down the block, especially if you were living in coastal cities. Pretty much everyone in those areas relied exclusively on meats like this to get by, and they had the nicest ways of preparing them too. You'd never get a bad bloat going that would make you want to stay indoors off of steamed or grilled salmon with rice. Plus, it helped that back then, we were still very much into exploring what other people and communities were cooking. So there were all these different ways of making salmon that never crossed anyone's mind before. People were suddenly experimenting, and there was enough of the stuff to go around. You've heard of buying store-bought pies and getting up to a serious baking session. Let me introduce you to canned and frozen pies, which were savory delights that were filled with meat. Usually, you'd get more beef and chicken than you bargained for with these, but sometimes they'd come in fruity flavors too because, towards the end of the boomer generation, plant-based and vegan eating was starting to pop off. It was really a wonderful time when this first dropped, though. People were suddenly starting to have their most favorite comfort food available to them in the most convenient ways. Going to the store to pick up a pie was a treat, in more ways than one. It was nice to have something so familiar on hand like that. Pineapples were starting to grow outside of Hawaii, and dare I say they built up a pretty serious fan base for themselves over the years. The PR here was insane. They went from being a fruit that people thought was only good in the summers to suddenly being featured with pizzas, sandwiches, fish, and God knows what else. You had pineapple upside-down cakes, or pineapples and ham, or even sweet and sour pork. The list was endless. This was a complete 360 from its usual position in the culture too, and it was really sudden. By the way, the 350 thing wasn't a pun, because you know the pineapples came in round 360-degree rings. Anyway, moving on. My personal theory is that the pricing and the need for cooler foods that broke away from the typical trends of savory, warm, and spicy were becoming more and more necessary. And, well, the people spoke for themselves and with their wallets. A big block to mass pineapple consumption was also that cracking one open simply took more effort than a lot of people were willing to spare for a tropical fruit they only kinda enjoyed. It's the same deal as people who don't bother with crab because it's just a pain to break open the legs to scoop a little bit of meat. Luckily, canned pineapples were the final nail in the coffin for complaints like that, because now you could just pop open a can and begin snacking away. No arrangement, tools, or slicing and dicing needed. One of the most classic street foods of all times is now coming to a supermarket near you in a can. At least, that's the branding they were going for with hot dogs. These pre-cooked bad boys were made with every kind of variation you could want to satisfy your hot dog craving. Pork fan? Got you covered. Chicken sausages, more your style? Have no fear, every can for chump change. Want to keep it strictly American and traditional with some beef? They have that too. They also doubled as party treats because you could go all out with pigs in a blanket or cocktail hot dogs. Canned hot dogs were really a part of the culture. And I don't mean that just because the first thing you think of when you hear the word American is somebody with a hot dog next to them. See, before this, hot dogs were something that were really beloved but were still something you had to either go out for or spend some time preparing and cooking. As a result, on those lazy days, they could never break past the barrier and reach real comfort food status. That was true until canned hot dogs came along and changed the entire game up. The popularity of sausage-based dishes spiked in popularity. It wasn't just hot dogs, but they definitely benefited the highest. People were having more hot dogs than ever before, and they were not being shy about their love of it either. Spaghetti, canned or dried, was just as available as hot dogs were, and equally in style. Again, we have to thank Chef Boyardee for doing community service on a national scale with these. Pre-cooked, tomato-based spaghetti for a few cents, canned and fresh. This is what modernization is all about. What's the point of all this fancy tech if we can't make eating food twice as easy as it usually is? Plus, you were getting some pretty good spaghetti. There were lots of concerns among new customers when this first dropped, because if something's mass-produced, it's likely that they're cutting corners somewhere or adding something to it in the name of additives and preservatives. But here, what you saw is what you got. It really is just spaghetti that could work for children or adults. People could have a cute date night at home with some spaghetti or feed their crying children immediately, and both would work. Chef Boyardee's was really the most popular pick by far for any kind of spaghetti-based dish, though. Out of all the canned spaghetti you could get, it was only Boyardee's that would have that perfect consistency. It wasn't overly tomato-y, not was it too creamy. The sauce wasn't thin, it knew how to do just enough, not too much or too little. You could reheat this in a microwave if you had one, or just pop open the stove and you'd be ready to eat a pretty serviceable plate of spaghetti. Plus, those bright red Chef Hector Boiardi pictures really worked wonders for the packaging. Just caught your eye in a store like nothing else. Would that work on you today, though? Or are we feeling lighter colors with packaging nowadays? Peaches and syrup are pretty much the ideal sugar rush for a boomer. They don't really do too well with all the stuff the youth drinks for beverages and sweets. I mean, Nutella cakes drizzled with chocolate syrup is a bit much, and so is a caramel frap from your local cafe. Canned peaches with syrup just hit the sweet spot perfectly, though, and it's something that takes boomers right back to their glory days in the 60s and 50s. It could be served as a dessert, eaten on its own, or paired with other sweet snacks to give you a refreshing and fruity meal. It went really well with ice cream, and it was also a must-have if you were trying any kind of fruit salad. Lots of housewives enjoyed how easy it made party preparation and the amount of variety they could get with it. You could serve up to 2 dishes made using these instead of ordering out, saving time, money, and a lot of mental energy. Peaches in syrup were not only a pantry staple, but also a symbol of convenience and creativity in the kitchen. They were a key ingredient in boomers' favorites like peach cobbler, upside-down cakes, or even Jell-O molds that were centerpieces at every potluck or party. Beyond desserts, they found their way into savory dishes too, with ham and peaches being a surprisingly popular combination. The syrup itself was a treat when poured over pancakes, waffles, or even blended into drinks for a quick burst of flavor. I truly get the boomers' vision. Canned sweet corn was pre-cooked and packed with brine and water, but it had this really soft and crunchy texture and also a natural sweetness to it that made it almost irresistible. Seriously, you had these soft but ever so slightly firm kernels that had a wonderful crisp to them, but not as much as fresh corn does. Plus, these were already pre-cooked like almost everything on the list is, so you were free to eat them right from the get-go as soon as you got your hands on a can. Originally, I remember hearing about how people were a little distrustful of this because the color was just a bit duller than what you would get on your usual cob. It was still yellow, but it was a little paler. Your parents probably know exactly what I'm talking about. That was just a side effect of the canning, though. You could have 12 or 15-ounce cans, and they were the pride and joy of so many corn-based dishes that did the rounds in neighborhoods and community cookbooks. With these, you could make anything from buttered sweet corn to salads, fritters, or use them in casseroles. You could even bake with them. Things like corn pudding or a cheesy corn bake were never unrealistic as long as you had the main ingredient ready to go. Plus, dealing with natural corn is a bit of a hassle. As far as your dairy needs go, condensed canned milk was right up there with regular old chocolate milk. People would grab a bottle or can on their way to work for a quick drink to freshen up their mood, and it would work every time. Lots of happier dentists in that era, too. Typically, you got these in 14-ounce cans, but the best part was that it didn't really require refrigeration, which wasn't exactly too common during the time of boomers. Some of the best brands to buy from were Borden's or Elsie the Cow. Actually, they were pretty much the only brands to buy from. Any store would have Borden's face front and other brands stacked in the back, which is ever so subtle, but the message was loud and clear. So, it looks good, it costs nothing, and it tastes awesome, but what's it actually made out of? Well, this milk was made by taking out a bit more than half of the water from the whole milk and then adding sugar to preserve it. You got some pretty rich milk that way, but no one was really buying this just to drink raw milk, even if that was part of it. The thing is, this made baking so much easier since you had good fresh milk closer to you than ever before. You no longer needed to buy whole milk from one shop. Everyone could just go to whatever store was nearest for them and get to make whatever they wanted. Lemon meringue pies or cookies, whatever you'd need was suddenly so much easier. It goes a long way towards awakening people to their inner chef when you give them almost MasterChef levels of access to good ingredients. Canned Spam is the perfect thing to end the list on because it more or less summarizes the tail end of the boomer generation and the eating habits that were so prominent in America. Back then, you see, people were deciding, and I know this is going to be mighty unbelievable to hear, that maybe it was time to use one less slice of cheese, put the bacon down, boil some eggs instead of ripping open a packet of beef jerky, and just take care of yourself more. Eating habits started reflecting that too, especially with lots of parents constantly whining about how McDonald's was ruining their children and swearing up and down that it was America's downfall. In hindsight, they may have been right, but back then, people were scrambling for all sorts of ideas as to what could take up the vacancies in their diets now. Campbell's oyster stew was another unique entry in Campbell's lineup. This soup featured oysters in a creamy, buttery broth, a delicacy for seafood lovers. Oyster stew has roots in early American cuisine, especially in coastal areas where fresh oysters were abundant. Campbell's oyster stew was a way for people to enjoy the luxurious taste of oysters without needing to go to a seafood restaurant. Oyster stew is a traditional dish that has been enjoyed for centuries. It is believed to have originated in England. While it may not have been everyone's cup of tea, it was a notable attempt to bring a bit of seafood elegance to the canned soup aisle. Amy's organic lentil vegetable soup was a crowd pleaser for those who loved a hearty vegetable-packed soup. What's not to love about a healthy soup that tastes just as good? With its blend of lentils and a variety of vegetables, this soup was both filling and nutritious. Amy's has always been a champion of organic and wholesome ingredients, and this soup was no different. It catered to health-conscious consumers who wanted a quick, easy meal without compromising on quality. The canned aisle didn't have many healthy options back then, so this lentil vegetable soup was all the rage. Speaking of vegetable soups, the Trader Joe's sweet potato bisque was a creamy, sweet treat that was beloved by many. This soup featured a rich, velvety texture with the natural sweetness of sweet potatoes. It was a great option for those looking for something a little different from the usual savory soups. Trader Joe's is known for its unique and seasonal products, and this sweet potato bisque was a standout for its flavor and quality. This one often made a grand appearance in the fall when sweet potatoes were in their prime. Unfortunately, it was a limited-time offering and has since been discontinued, but with the rise of easy, quick Trader Joe meals, I can see this one making a comeback to the soup aisle soon. Sourdough starter is a magical concoction that turns easy ingredients into fluffy, delicious bread. It was a staple in Grandma's pantry long before gluten unfastened was even a factor. This ancient tradition goes back hundreds of years, proving that while the era has advanced, our love for an awesome loaf of bread hasn't changed a chunk. The best part? That sourdough starter can live forever. With a bit of care, it can outlive Grandma herself. Just consider it. A little jar of gooey goodness bubbling away, equipped to convert any dough right into a crusty masterpiece. Sourdough is a real multitasker in the kitchen. You could make the whole lot from classic loaves to pancakes, waffles, or even pizza crust with that starter. And don't even get me started on the flavor. It has a unique tanginess that normal bread just can't compete with. Plus, some say that the wild yeast found in sourdough can be easier on your digestive system. It's like a pleasant little bacteria party to your gut. But be cautious. If you forget about your starter, it will develop into a science experiment gone wrong. No one wants to create a brand new breed of kitchen mold. So, next time you tear right into a warm slice of sourdough, don't forget Grandma's old jar of starter, bubbling away like a wizard's potion, bringing comfort and pleasure with every bite. Chitlins are just out of the conversation for most modern tastes and populations. I'm going to give you a minute to guess what these are before I drop it on you, so let me know your best guess in the comments. Anyway, I'm not sure how close all of you'll get or how many of you know, but these are pig intestines. Don't worry, they have to go through a pretty top-notch cleaning process, so you don't have to worry about your intestines while you chow down. They get fried or simmered with an assortment of vegetables like garlic, thyme, parsley, and oregano, and lots of garlic and spices. These have a really strong fragrance, so they became a community dish or a famous go-to for potlucks. You always knew when someone was making chitterlings because you could quite literally smell it a block away. It's a dish with a lot of tradition. It's very precious to the African American communities in the South. It's one of those dishes that symbolizes heritage to them. And it's probably because the entire practice and recipe were more or less exclusively theirs. A community secret, one that you could get if you were well accepted in your local space, but something you wouldn't know about otherwise. There's also some rich history here. It's said that back in the days of rampant slavery, the very leftovers of the pig would be given to plantation workers, as it wasn't fit for the owners. That's sort of how a lot of them got used to it. And they reclaimed a painful piece of the past by making it a community dish that their kids happily grew up on, this time in their own homes and not plantations. Something that even predates African American and European influence in the South are all the marks that the Native American people have left on the cooking there. Boiled peanuts, for example, aren't something you'd ever bring up today, but back in the times that predated even the colonial settler era, this was considered a quintessential Southern snack. I mean, sure, we've come a long way from boiled peanuts to barbecue wings with ranch, but the difference is still amazing. It wasn't even that outlandish to encounter someone chowing on their boiled peanuts happily during a football or basketball game in the early 20th century, too. It was a simple and effective snack to prepare, and it made the peanuts a lot more tender and better. You got this soft peanut snack with a really earthy flavor. One of the traditions surrounding this dish was that they would often be served up at roadside stalls in the summer months and in rural areas, particularly intersections that got a lot of foot traffic. You set up a hot dog stand around the subs or commercial areas in New York, so same logic here, right? Peanuts were native to South America anyway, so regardless of where somebody would set these stalls up, they'd get a fair amount of customers. It sounds so easy, I might just make it myself. What about you? Canned vegetables were the silent workers of Granny's kitchen. Those beautiful inventions offered the hint of a summer in Granny's pantry, although it was buried in snow. Think for a moment that you entered her kitchen and saw those shiny jars standing as soldiers, always giving you the taste of comfort in your mouth. Canning the vegetables wasn't just about preserving the harvest. It was, to a certain extent, a survival technique in a world where a grocery store was not a day's ride away. For the green beans or the tomatoes, for instance, Grandma would always ensure that she picked the freshest from her farm and prepared them in the most appropriate way. If they are your favorite vegetables or fruits, it's like preserving them in time. If you close the lid well, you are going to be eating the produce of the summer, even in winter. Did you know that the art of canning dates back to the early 19th century? It was developed as a means through which people could acquire food during wartime. Boy, that operation was something like a military strategy. And now, we can enjoy that same convenience in our homes. Canned veggies are perfect for making soups, casseroles, and even as a side dish. No cooking required. Simply heat the meal and you're set to start your delicious eating spree. Okay, now let's spice things up a bit with this next one. Heinz cream of tomato soup with a kick of chili was a bold twist on the classic tomato soup. Heinz, a brand famous for tomato soup, decided to add a little extra kick to this spicy version. The result was a creamy tomato base with a delightful hint of chili heat, perfect for those who like their tomato soup with a bit of a punch. The history of Heinz tomato soup dates back to 1897 when Heinz first introduced their classic recipe. This spicier variant was a fun, limited-time addition to their lineup, but it seems it didn't stick around for long. Still, it remains a memorable flavor for those who had the chance to try it. All right, let's get a little weird with it. We're talking about Campbell's mock turtle soup. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, hear me out. This wasn't actually made from turtles. It was a Victorian-era concoction made with beef, veal, and sometimes even calf's head. Campbell's mock turtle soup might sound like something out of a fairy tale, but it was a real-life favorite for many. This soup was inspired by the traditional English dish, mock turtle soup, which was created as a more affordable alternative to the expensive turtle soup. The result was a unique, somewhat exotic flavor that set it apart from more common soups. The name mock turtle was just a fancy way of saying it was a fancy soup. Mock turtle soup was a popular dish in the 19th century. It was often served at grand dinners and banquets. Unfortunately, this historical recipe has long been discontinued, but it still holds a special place in the culinary world's history books. Salted pork, also known as the original meat preservation recipe, is the true most valuable player of Grandma's kitchen. Before anyone stares in the refrigerator, people rely on salt to maintain the freshness of their meat, or at least keep it edible. Imagine a time when all that stood between you and rotting meat was a hearty layer of salt. Grandma knew this secret well. She took a good piece of pork and mixed it with salt, and voila! Salted pork was born. The exciting thing about this method is that the salt draws out moisture. This makes bacteria almost unable to grow. It's like having a tiny bouncer at your meat party, ensuring that no unwanted germs spoil the celebration. Salted pork could be thrown into a pot of beans, added to a hearty stew, or simply fried up for breakfast. The options are endless, and Grandma knew them all. In addition, salted pork is a staple food during difficult times. It supported the family when fresh meat was in short supply. As an added bonus, it's versatile and will last for months. Perfect for the long winter months or if you're traveling around the country. Although modern health trends warn against excessive sodium intake, in your grandmother's time, a pinch of salt was the only way to survive. So next time you're eating bacon or ham, think of your grandmother's salted pork heirloom. It is not just a relic from the past, but a delicious reminder of how creativity can lead to delicious solutions. Next up, we have lentil soup from Progresso. Now, I know what you're thinking. Lentil soup? Really? But trust me, this wasn't your grandma's lentil soup. Progresso kicked it up a notch with roasted veggies, giving it a smoky, flavorful twist. It was a great way to sneak in some extra protein and fiber. This was one of the healthiest canned meals out there, and its taste spoke for itself. Lentils have been a staple food for centuries, dating back to ancient Egypt and Rome. They're packed with nutrients and are a great source of plant-based protein. Progresso's version took this traditional dish and gave it a modern twist with roasted vegetables. Lentils are still loved in many countries in Asia, but the States have had enough of this protein option. Unfortunately, this particular variety has been discontinued, but it was a great example of how Progresso was always experimenting with new and exciting flavors. This soup might not be for everyone, but it was definitely a dish that had people licking food off their fingers. Now, let's talk about Amy's Tuscan bean and rice soup. Amy's is renowned for its organic and natural products, and this soup was no exception. This was a vegetarian's dream come true. It was creamy, flavorful, and packed with protein. And let's not forget that this soup was organic, so you could feel good about eating it. Tuscan cuisine is known for its simplicity and use of fresh ingredients. Bean soups, like this one, are a classic part of the Tuscan diet. Amy's commitment to using high-quality organic ingredients made this soup a favorite among health-conscious eaters. The Tuscan bean and rice soup was a perfect example of how canned soups could be both delicious and nutritious. It was all the rage for fitness freaks, and they still call for a comeback. Hardtack, the last biscuit standing. Let's be honest, hardtack isn't anyone's idea of comfort food, but don't underestimate this resilient little biscuit. It's the culinary Swiss Army knife. Made to last, hardtack has been an emergency food staple for centuries, and if you peeked into Grandma's pantry, you might still find a few of these unbreakable snacks lurking. Designed for sailors, soldiers, and anyone needing long-lasting nourishment, hardtack keeps it simple with just flour, water, and salt. It may sound basic, but that's the secret to its survival power. It can last for years. In fact, some hardtack has even been pulled from shipwrecks, still rock hard and technically edible. Now that is longevity. Though not exactly soft or flavorful, hardtack has been a literal lifesaver. It's tough enough to be gnawed on as is, softened in coffee, or crumbled into soup. Just don't expect a gourmet experience. It's about as exciting as chewing on a brick. But for Grandma, this was essential, a way to get carbs when nothing fresh was around. So, while today's diets lean towards fresh and flavorful, there's something endearing about a food that stood the test of time. Cornmeal is one of those ingredients that works in the background, which is worthy without receiving much attention. But Grandma was aware of its value. From this fine and sometimes coarsely ground corn product, she could prepare everything, from cornbread to the thick polenta. If there was one thing that Grandma knew how to do, it was to turn a single ingredient into some kind of masterpiece. Enough has already been said about the fact that cornmeal has a rich history in America and is especially typical for Southern dishes. It is the basis for comforting me's and Grandma's cornbread recipe that could make even the cold heart melt in joy. With nothing more than cornmeal, water, and some eggs, you would get a warm golden loaf ready for buttering. Yet cornmeal is not just an enabler of cornbread, if I may say so. It can be used in thickening soups, or it can be used to coat fish before frying, or even to make polenta, which can be served creamy or allowed to set and be sliced. It certainly gives a feeling that this pantry staple is the Danny DeVito of the kitchen, always willing and able to take on new roles. Which is a classic congealed salad. So this is a molded gelatin salad that's actually a point of pride for a lot of Southerners because, as they would say, it shows off their creativity and the side of them that can take a joke. You usually think of traditional cooking, and you think of some pretty uptight figures watching every teaspoon. And I wouldn't blame you. It wasn't always like that, though. even in the 20th century. Jell-O was constantly being marketed as this ultra-convenience food that could make the life of a wife that much easier in the kitchen. It was all that people were buying from 1930 to even as late as 1970. I know you've heard of flavors like pineapple, cherries, or whipped cream when it comes to Jell-O, but some of these people were using flavors like olives, pimentos, and celery. Celery-flavored Jell-O. Can you imagine? I definitely can't. It was a real thing though, and it got discontinued in the 1970s. While it did last, people were making gelatin-based dishes regularly, like the concealed salad. It was tasty, chewy, colorful, and it was different from the usual onslaught of savory foods that might be amazing, but will probably leave you with a food coma. If you ever felt like having something lighter, this was definitely the way to go. This next one might be an acquired taste to some, but it's only further proof that Jell-O dominance was a real thing. I mean, the out-of-nowhere rise in popularity was sudden when it did happen, but you couldn't deny things like tomato aspic looked beautiful on the table. Tomato aspic is basically just this gelatin mold that makes use of tomato sauce, gelatin, and things like Worcestershire sauce, hot sauce, and celery or hard-boiled eggs. As you can probably imagine, this gives it a whirlwind of flavors to work off of, but it also makes it really pretty to look at. You gotta think from an aesthetic point of view. The striking red of the tomato soup, the shiny glisten of the Jell-O, all mixed together and complemented perfectly by the softness of that yellow egg and the greens. It had a lot going on, and it was one of those dishes where your eye immediately went to it and you would be like, "What's this?" Hence why this became so popular, especially for potlucks and family gatherings. Never let a chance to impress those in-laws slip away, right? While the dish might be forgotten by the larger public now, it'll never really slip away from our hearts. Tomato aspic is an amazing side, and that's a hill I'll readily die on. Plus, that little topping of sour cream at the very end was to die for. I mean, this dish really had a lot going for it. You could enjoy mushrooms with eggs in one bite, purely tomato sauce and gelatin in another, and if you still weren't feeling it, you could always just add more sauce. So in other words, it was pretty adaptable. Could you call Southern culture and tradition minimalist? They're so flashy, and they definitely don't cut any corners when it comes to the food. At the same time, I doubt any other area in the States uses their groceries as efficiently as they do. They'll even make things like homemade pickles. No self-respecting grandma would let a crop of cucumbers go to waste. Enter homemade pickles. Pickles aren't just a way to add zing to a sandwich. They are a way to maintain all of the garden's hard work. When the cucumbers roll up too fast for you to eat, you pickle them, and it's so easy. But pickles aren't just limited to cucumbers, carrots, onions, even nuts can be salted. Ready to be a delicious and crunchy side dish in almost any meal. Pickles have a fun history too. It dates back thousands of years to ancient Mesopotamia. But in Grandma's time, it was all about jars and secret salt recipes passed down from generation to generation. Some pickles are sweet, some types have a sour taste, and some packed a punch that would bring tears to your eyes. It is a science and an art, and Grandma has perfected the pickling process. The best part? Pickles will last forever, okay? Maybe not forever, but it's close enough. If stored properly, it can be stored for months or even years, ready to add deliciousness to any meal. All right, let's talk about this Campbell's Homestyle chicken noodle soup. This was a vegetarian's dream come true. It was creamy, flavorful, and packed with protein with a combination of white beans, rice, and spinach. Campbell's. This particular variety gained popularity in many states, especially in the Midwest, where hearty soups are a staple in comfort food cuisine. One of the most memorable aspects of Campbell's Homestyle chicken noodle soup was its iconic advertising campaign. The ads featured the chunky soup label prominently and were often endorsed by celebrity athletes like NFL stars. Interestingly, Campbell's even made a point to highlight the homemade quality of the soup in their marketing, suggesting that it was made with the same care and attention as if it were prepared in a family kitchen. Chicken noodle soup has a long history as a go-to comfort food, and Campbell's Homestyle version aimed to take that tradition to the next level. Despite its popularity, This version eventually fell off the shelves. Progresso Italian wedding soup. This was a classic for a reason. I mean, who doesn't love a bowl of warm, comforting soup filled with tiny meatballs, spinach, and carrots? It was like a little taste of Italy in a can. Perfect for a cozy day in. Despite the name, Italian wedding soup isn't traditionally served at weddings in Italy. It's believed the name comes from the idea that it's a hearty and celebratory soup, perfect for a special occasion. The Italian wedding soup has roots in southern Italian cuisine and was brought to America by Italian immigrants. Progresso's version was a convenient way to enjoy this classic dish at home. Though it's no longer available, it was a beloved choice for those who enjoyed a taste of Italy. Dried beans may sound unattractive, but don't let its unassuming appearance fool you. They are the kings of the pantry. These little guys are the unsung heroes of Grandma's kitchen. And there's always a sack or two hidden somewhere in the back of the pantry. Cheap, nutritious, and can last for many years. Dried beans are truly a miracle food. In fact, in difficult times, they often form the backbone of many meals. You can't go wrong with a hearty bean soup or stew. When you want to feed a crowd without breaking the bank, let's face it, Grandma knows how to stretch out a meal. She can turn a pound of beans into a week's worth of dinners, and each nut tastes better than the last. Of course, there is also soak them at night all over it. That sounds tricky in today's fast-paced, microwave-ready world. But in Grandma's time, that was just part of life. You soak the beans and wait. And when they're ready, they're cooked slowly over low heat until they melt deliciously in your mouth. Dry beans also come in all shapes and sizes, such as kidney beans, pinto beans, black beans, etc. Grandma's pantry is basically a bean buffet. It has space for all kinds of soups, stews, and salads. So next time you're walking down the bean aisle, give a nod to these pantry powerhouses. Poke salad, or otherwise known as poke salad, is a dish that's entirely made from the leaves of pokeweed. Not sure what that is? Pokeweed is a plant that grows exclusively in the native to the southern and eastern bits of America. It's a wild plant that grows pretty regularly in the region, characterized by its bright red stems. Here's the catch, though. The whole thing is toxic. It's on the low end of the toxicity scale, that's for sure, but the whole thing will send you either reeling to the toilet or reaching for a strong painkiller. Probably more Panadol than you've had in a while, unless you work night shifts. Okay, now we know what pokeweed is, but I know your next question. If the whole thing is toxic, what business does it have on a list of food traditions? Hold your horses. Technically, the leaves and berries of the plant are edible and safe to eat if you cook them twice over in separate water. Bingo! That's exactly what traditional Southern recipes would call for, especially when making poke salad. There was a lot of focus on cooking it properly to remove any harmful elements, but the end result was this really earthy and crunchy salad that left anyone curious about what they just ate, and probably a bit more open to the idea of a salad bowl for breakfast. Foraging wild plants and making neat little salads out of them really has those hunter-gatherer vibes and all, but I'd rather go back to food I know won't give me diarrhea or something the next day, depending on whether or not the person cooking it was careful enough. That's why the next thing on our list is fried liver mush. This is pretty much the textbook definition of a typical Southern lunch. One more thing that was really popular in the early 20th century was corn. Any kind of corn. Corn flour, corn on the cob, cornmeal. If it had the word in it, it was in most of what you ate, and that's a fact I'll bet money on. This dish is no different because it used pork liver and cornmeal and seasoned it to the moon and back with any kind of spice the chef could get their hands on. Ever wondered where the South got its reputation for loving spicy food? Well, there you go. This and a host of other recipes that pushed the heat to the extreme were big proponents of that idea. Liver mush itself, though, isn't entirely American. It comes from German and African American culture, as it was a very popular way in those cuisines to preserve pork meat and extend its use. This really took off in North Carolina for some reason. Many areas even had their own liver mush festivals and competitions. It's an innovative dish that makes use of pig parts that people would otherwise throw away. And it's a pretty good comfort food if you're into beefy flavor profiles. Sadly, the trend of eating lesser-known parts of the animal has really just died down. People don't look beyond wings, thighs, and breasts. Maybe a neck if they're feeling adventurous. If they're really feeling like getting into some unexplored territory, maybe people would consider a tongue or feet. However, things like this creamy roasted chicken with herb dumpling soup was a total game changer. I mean, chicken soup just got a major upgrade. The broth was rich and flavorful, and those herb dumplings were the perfect addition. Chicken soup has been used as a remedy for colds and flu for centuries. Some believe it has medicinal properties, although the science is still debated. So, why did creamy roasted chicken with herb dumpling soup disappear from our shelves? Well, shifting consumer tastes and a focus on lighter, healthier options meant this rich, creamy classic just couldn't keep up. Plus, Campbell's had to streamline their lineup to make room for new favorites. This soup was known for its hearty and filling nature, making it a popular choice for families looking for a quick and satisfying meal, and it's missed dearly. Let's talk about Pepperidge Farm Hunter's Soup. Pepperidge Farm, known for its high-quality baked goods and foods, introduced this soup to offer a substantial, flavorful option for busy families looking for a quick yet satisfying meal. A fun twist? The soup's name and concept were influenced by the company's commitment to capturing the essence of wholesome, country-style cooking in a convenient can. This was a hearty, meaty soup that was perfect for those cold winter days. It was packed with chunks of beef, carrots, and potatoes, and it had this rich, savory broth that was just incredible. Hunter's soup is believed to have originated in England as a meal for hunters to warm themselves up after a long day. It was a favorite among those who enjoyed a more meaty soup. Homemade vinegar was the magical elixir lurking in Grandma's pantry, the secret ingredient for everything, from tangy pickles to household cleaning. For most people, vinegar is a simple ingredient that is placed on the table as a condiment. This fermented concoction was the functional kitchen multi-tool that could and would do it all. Making vinegar at home is kind of an experiment. Taking some kind of fruit juice, say apple or grape, adding sugar into it and letting Mother Nature do the rest of her magic. Grandma would use it in her pickling adventures, ensuring those cucumbers were brined to perfection, ready to become a crunchy side dish. Why spend your hard-earned money on store-bought when you have fresh homemade food in a jar? But vinegar wasn't just for the kitchen. Oh no! Grandma would use it to clean surfaces, remove stains, and even freshen the laundry. Just imagine the confusion when people realized that the sour-smelling liquid could also work wonders around the house. Besides, homemade vinegar is organically better than its commercial counterparts, packed with probiotics and beneficial bacteria. So, next time you reach for a bottle of vinegar, remember that Grandma wasn't just a kitchen magician. She was a pioneer of practical living, turning something as simple as fermented fruit juice into a pantry staple that helped her cook, clean, and preserve all in one fell swoop. Molasses is not the first thing that comes to mind when people think of sweeteners. But if you opened Grandma's pantry door, you'd see this thick and gooey liquid ready to enhance the taste of everything she baked. Cane sugar has to take back its seat because molasses adds a unique flavor to almost any dish. It doesn't look like much or anything special, yet it contains numerous nutrients and adds a burst of flavor. Getting its source from sugarcane or sugar beets, molasses can be compared to the sweetener's grandmaster, the sweetness of which can be mediocre to robust. Well, did you know that molasses is derived in the process of sugar manufacturing? It's like the bonus prize that no one knew they needed. Now for some more interesting facts about molasses. It is packed with nutrients, rich in vitamins and minerals such as iron, calcium, and potassium, among others. This sticky sweetener is perhaps one of the most versatile you will come across. You can use it in cookies, marinades, barbecue sauces, and even as a sweetener for baked beans. Stored properly, molasses can last for years, just like those hidden Christmas cookies from last year's batch. We should also take some time to mention Hawaii's consistent efforts in the Spam superiority movement because they really played a hand in it. You could slice it, fry it, serve it as a side dish, pair it up with potatoes, eggs, and toast, or use it as a filling. You could make Spam mac and cheese, bake it with pineapple slices, or make casseroles out of it. Basically, a lot of typical American eating worked well with Spam, which made the transition to healthier habits a lot easier for boomers who grew up on greasy bacon and overly cheesy burgers. Can you believe the variety of canned foods boomers had? Comment which food you like the most, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.